David Trent Todeschini coming to you from the beautiful hills of southern North Carolina, bringing you the facts behind the news and the story that contradicts the mainstream media lies, hoping to convince you that the apparency of reality is in fact entirely fabricated and the illusion only appears to be true. But in the battle for the survival of the American Republic and Western civilization, we must expose these illusions in order to bring about and nurture a greater awakening that will preserve our God-given rights and freedoms, not only for ourselves, but for our progeny and for all the future generations of human souls on this planet. We not only must plant the trees whose shade we will never live long enough to enjoy, but first we must uproot the poisonous trees we have for so long been deceived into sitting under. We are dedicated to educate and inform and stand in the gap for all of those innocents who cannot fight for themselves. We have put on the armor of God and stand ready with the weapons of truth to put down the lies of tyranny wherever we find them. We are the watchmen of liberty. We don't forgive, we don't forget, we are invincible, we are American patriots. To this end, and with this firm resolve, my close associates and I have sworn the oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States and all Americans who share our values and wish to live free. Welcome to the most deleted, shadow banned, demonetized, censored, and trolled channel on social media. Recipient of the Patriot Warrior Purple Q Award. Hello, this is Dave from Net4Truth USA, Inglorious Patriots. It is January 4th, 2026, and the time now of this recording is 0:29 hours Eastern Time here in beautiful North Carolina. I want to start out by saying I hope everybody listening has had a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And this year, for those of us who are positioned properly, promises to be very fruitful indeed. Excuse me while I sip on my quadruple latte here. Espresso. Unbelievable. Wow, it's good stuff. All right. I've been following this guy, Kevin Juan, for about 2 months now. He's got, I don't know, last count about 5 or 6 YouTube channels, and it seems to be AI, but it's based on a real person. And he talks about financial things. And since I worked on Wall Street for 25 years with IBM, servicing banking and brokerage, and was the regional specialist for check processing, I know what I'm talking about. And for a long time I knew, and it was no secret on Wall Street, that silver has been depressed artificially by all of these put options, by people who buy paper contracts never intending to take delivery. And it's the same with the stock market. The recent fiasco with the GameStop stock, where they shorted more stock than their actual stock existed. And then when everybody in the gaming community bought the stock and there was no more stock left to buy to cover their shorts, a lot of people lost a lot of money and probably even lost their jobs on trading floors because they knew what they were doing. They're trying to put GameStop out of business and take the profit on the shorts. The money that you have in your pocket, the paper money, the fiat currency, is not worth a lit fart in a wool mitten, as I said in a prior video. This is the only real money. I don't know if you can see this. This is the only real money. This is not fiat. This is something you hold in your hand. This is a 10-ounce bar 0.999 silver bar. And I've got more coming. I got loads in the stacks in the safe. When the caca hits the air movement device, this will save you from starving to death. Now, I don't recommend these for trade on the street because you can't bust off a little piece. But there is little 100-gram bars that are separated into 1-gram pieces that you can bust off and trade for a hamburger or something. And you can get those at either of the brokers that I use, and I'll leave the links down in the description. The 3 top things in the news are that this metal is needed by industry to make solar panels, to make batteries, and by the military to make missiles and guidance systems and things like that. That's why President Trump designated it as a strategic metal. What does that mean? Well, that means that the U.S. government is making acquisition of that metal a priority. And they're going to be competing with Tesla, and they're going to compete with the solar panel manufacturers, the majority of which are in China, and the electronics company making chips out of Taiwan, and everybody needs silver. Problem is there's only a limited supply, and the amount of silver that goes into all of this electronic stuff and batteries for cars and batteries for phones. In fact, Samsung supposedly came out with a new battery that charges like in 5 minutes and has a 1,000-mile range that everybody wants. Problem is, it takes a shit ton of silver to make one of these batteries. So everybody's competing for the resource, and they're outbidding the actual supply. So Monday morning, when trading opens up, expect that all of these people who have shorts to buy silver at a loss to cover their shorts, because the market demands more silver than is produced on the planet. The paper has suppressed the price of silver for well over 40 years. I have bars of 1-ounce bars of silver that I bought years ago for $11. They're still in the safe. Okay? I have regrets of how many Walking Liberty silver dollars that I spent on Mars bars and Three Musketeers, that if I kept a quarter of them, I would be much more well off than I am now. But hindsight is 20/20. There are a lot of people holding crypto. And I don't know what the price of crypto is right now. I really could care less. Because crypto is another Ponzi scheme as far as I'm concerned. See, like I said in the previous video, if you have paper money, if tomorrow they close your bank account and you got zero, you can go down to the bank and say, give me my money. But if you got crypto, and the crypto market goes haywire, you have no recourse. There's no place to go. There's no people to see. There's no 800 number to call and say, where's my crypto? Where's my Bitcoin? Bitcoin is like, back hundreds of years ago, they were trading tulips on Wall Street. Look it up. They were trading tulips. You know the flowers? Freaking tulips like petunias on Wall Street. That's how stupid people are. But stupid people make people like me rich. Because come Monday morning, there's going to be a swing on the silver price like you would not believe. I suggest that before Monday morning comes, you go to one of the brokers I got listed down in the description. Call them up. Tell them Dave from N4T sent you. I don't know if it's going to do anything for you. But mention this channel. Say, listen, I want to buy whatever is there. And you can go on their website. They're linked in the description. And buy as much silver as you can afford with as much money as you can afford to lose. And just sit on it. Don't worry about ups and downs with the thing, because the shorts are going to buy silver and spike it up, because they got to deliver on the contracts that they have contracts on. Otherwise, they're going to lose their position. You watch these 3 videos, you'll find out. Follow this guy on his channel. This guy's amazing. Even if you have 50 ounces, I believe, and I'm not a financial expert, don't take my advice, but I got $15,000 worth of silver in various forms that I've been stacking for years. I say, what the hell are you waiting for? Well, when I buy a house this summer, by that time, what I got in the safe is going to pay for the mortgage and pay it off. That's my game plan. But anyway, I own this house, so when I move out of here, I can rent this place for $1,000. Buying stocks and buying crypto, in my opinion, is the worst move you can make. And when you sell silver, you sell it not for money, not for fiat. You either move it into gold, which is money. Gold is money. Gold ain't never gonna go down. Never, ever. It might dip up and down on the charts, but that's just people trading. Silver can only go up with all the evidence that you're going to see in the 3 following videos that this guy did, which is amazing. Now, yesterday, while everybody was sleeping, the U.S. military raided Venezuela militarily. Helicopters, warships, Tomahawk missiles, the whole 9 yards. And they went and snatched that little piece of shit Maduro out of his bedroom in his underwear and his wife, and brought him out by helicopter to the aircraft carrier Iwo Jima. And he's on his way right now, if he didn't get here already. He's on his way to be tried for multiple crimes, drug smuggling, terrorism, the whole 9. He's going to end up right next to El Chapo in Alcatraz up there in the Rockies. And now the military, our military, controls Venezuela. See, when Maduro took over, he seized all the U.S. properties that were there, the oil rigs and all of that stuff that made him the millions that he could do drugs with to kill our people. And I fully support President Trump when he's blowing up these ships coming over to try to sell drugs here. I fully support that. If you're not an American citizen and you're caught smuggling, you should be executed on the spot, summarily executed. But real slow like, so that you give up all your buddies and all your connections before they put the slug in your face. Lucky I ain't the president, because, tell you what, it's about time. And it's about time that they arrest the terrorists and the traitors that are right here in Congress, in the United States government. And all the fraud that's going on with all these Somalians is incredible. Billions of dollars. Billions. And I think the only solution is to change the money. Just say tomorrow, U.S. dollar ain't what the lit fart in the wool mint. You got 30 days to trade it in, prove that you earned it legitimately, and we'll give you the new money. Otherwise, if you can't prove that you earned it legitimately in a legitimate business, take that dollar bill, that $100 bill, and wipe your ass with it. Because it ain't worth the shit. It ain't worth the shit now. But it's still recognized as legal tender. The new money will not be able to be counterfeited. And we ain't giving no more money to nobody. Fuck you all. I don't care. You got problems in your country, you handle it. You go out on the street like they're doing over there in Saudi Arabia and in Germany and in Poland, and you throw the politicians that put you in that position the fuck out of office. Grab them by the scruff of the neck and throw them frick out the window. That's what we need to do here. People have had it up to here. People have had it up to here. Now, with the military in control of Venezuela, guess what? Now we got your oil. Now we got your gold. Now we got your silver. Now we got your mines. Now we got everything. So you sent, I don't know how many, 347 tons on aircraft, and talk about that. I thought the airspace was secure. How the fuck they got that shit out of Venezuela? I have no idea. But supposedly, allegedly, under the guise of farming equipment, this dude sent a couple of dozen planes, two decoy planes to Florida, and a bunch of others to China and to Russia, with stops along the way, with Venezuela's entire stock of silver, hoping to corner the market, like the Hunts brothers did years ago. But now we got control of Venezuela. We got their mines, we got the oil, we got everything. So screw you. FAFO, bro. But that doesn't solve the silver supply problem. Even if you doubled the mines capacity, it's still not going to supply what industry needs to keep the assembly lines going. And those guys who are the Chinese and the Russians who have hoarded silver, pretty soon they're going to run out. And the main sources of silver, the raw silver, the rocks that the silver is melted out of, is South America, Venezuela, Mexico, Colombia, all those places. And we got control. We got to buy the gomas and llamas. So anyway, like I said, anybody listening to this channel has got a few dollars that they can spare. Go down to the links in the description to the brokers I use and buy yourself some silver before the market opens on Monday. And don't worry about the price takes a dip, because there's going to be a big spread between the ask and the bid. You're going to pay more than what the chart says. In Japan, they're paying $130 for an ounce of silver. This bar in Japan, this bar right here, 10 ounces of 999 silver is worth $1,300 right now. So I paid a little bit over spot. I paid $4.5 over spot for it. Be prepared. Because as the silver prices rise, as the precious metals rise in price, it doesn't mean that the metal is more expensive. It just means your money is worth less. A lot of people are under that illusion. They bought a house in the 80s and paid $60,000 for it. And they can list it on the market for over $1 million. Look at all the money I made. You didn't make no money. You didn't make no money. Money ain't worth a shit. Money ain't worth a lit fart in a wool mitten. Buy metal. Hold on to it. Keep it. Because it's going to go absolutely batshit crazy Monday. This is Dave from Net4 Truth USA, Inglorious Patriots. Watch these 3 videos. It's going to take about an hour. But this is the best hour that you'll ever spend watching videos on the internet. Thank you for watching. The following 3 videos are from Kevin Huang's multiple YouTube channels. These are relatively new channels that I have been following since he started posting. I have vetted his information as accurate, and I suggest you subscribe to all of them. The decision to follow his advice is up to you, as there is always a risk when investing. But precious metals have always been an assurance of preserving wealth from war, depression, or inflation.
How the U.S. is quietly eliminating $38 trillion in debt. Look at your savings account right now. That number you see? It's shrinking, not because you're spending it, but because someone else is erasing it. While you sleep, the U.S. government owes $38 trillion, a debt so massive it would stack dollar bills beyond the moon. They will never pay it back. But here's what they won't tell you. They don't need to. Because in 2024, the math changed. For the first time in history, America spends more on interest than on its entire military. The trap has been set, and you are inside it. There are only 3 ways out. 2 are impossible. The third has already begun. Welcome to boring currency. Now, before we go any further, if you've seen a few winners, maybe crossed 50, or perhaps you remember when $1 actually meant something, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Think of it as locking the vault so you don't lose track of what really matters. And tell me, where are you watching this from? Are you in the States watching your retirement evaporate? Or somewhere across the ocean, wondering when this contagion reaches your doorstep? Drop your location in the comments. Because what we're about to discuss affects every single currency, every single saver on this planet. Now, let's talk about how they're making $38 trillion disappear. If someone walks into Times Square today, they will see a giant digital clock. But this clock doesn't tell time. It tells the story of America's financial suicide. The number on that screen is spinning so fast, human eyes can barely track it. $38 trillion and climbing. Every second, every breath, the number grows larger. To understand how impossibly large this number is, imagine this. If someone took 38 trillion $1 bills and stacked them on top of each other, the pile wouldn't just reach the clouds. It wouldn't just touch the edge of space. It would fly past the moon and keep going. For decades, politicians stood at podiums and smiled. They told the public not to worry. Economists wrote papers explaining why deficits didn't matter. They said the debt was just money America owed to itself. They treated it like a number in a video game, big and scary, but ultimately meaningless. But in 2024, something changed. The math stopped being theoretical. It became predatory. For the first time in American history, the government is now spending more money on interest payments than it spends on the entire United States military. Read that again. More on interest than on defense. More on paying off old debts than on equipping soldiers, ships, and aircraft. The interest bill alone is approaching $1 trillion every single year. This is not a budget line item anymore. This is a beast, And it is feeding. Here's where it gets terrifying. When a normal family has too much debt, they make changes. They stop eating at restaurants. They cancel subscriptions. They cut back until the numbers balance. But a government is not a family. A massive portion of the U.S. budget is locked in, untouchable. Social Security, Medicare. These are promises made to millions of aging Americans. Politicians cannot cut these programs. If they try, they lose elections, or worse. So the government cannot reduce spending. Instead, to pay the interest on yesterday's debt, they borrow more money today. They are using a new credit card to pay the minimum balance on the old credit card. And this increases the total debt, which increases next year's interest payment, which requires even more borrowing next year. It is a feedback loop, a spiral. And once it starts, mathematics takes over. The debt doesn't grow in a straight line anymore. It grows exponentially, faster and faster and faster. Now here's the critical question. How does a country escape a debt trap of this magnitude? Economists will tell you there are only 3 ways. 3 exits, 3 doors out of this burning building, but 2 of those doors are sealed shut. The first option is called austerity. This means the government raises taxes dramatically and cuts spending brutally. To actually balance the budget and start paying down the debt, the government would need to do something extreme. They would need to double income taxes on every American, or they would need to completely abolish the U.S. military. Neither of these will ever happen. Any politician who suggests cutting Social Security checks by 30% ends their career instantly. Any president who proposes a 70% tax rate loses the next election in a landslide. The American economy is addicted to government spending. Pulling the plug would trigger an economic collapse worse than the Great Depression. So austerity is impossible. The second option is default. The government could simply stand up and say, "We are not paying. Countries like Argentina and Russia have done this before. But for the United States, this is the nuclear option." The entire global financial system is built on one assumption, that U.S. Treasury bonds are risk-free. Every bank, every pension fund, every international trade contract rests on this foundation. If the U.S. defaults, the global banking system collapses overnight. Credit cards stop working. International trade freezes. It would be a financial apocalypse. So explicit default is also off the table. That leaves only one option, the third door, the one that every empire in history has eventually walked through. Rome, Weimar Germany, post-war Britain, they all chose the same path. It is the path of least resistance. It is the quiet solution. The soft default. The government doesn't refuse to pay the debt. Instead, they pay every single cent. But they pay it back in currency that is worth far less than when they borrowed it. They print the difference, and in doing so, they make the debt disappear, not on paper. But in reality, this is not theory. This is policy, and it has already begun. There's a museum in Berlin. Inside, behind thick glass, sits a photograph from 1923. It shows a German woman. She is using stacks of cash, bundles of paper money, to light her stove, because the money was worth less than firewood. This is what happens when a government chooses the third door. But before we walk through that door, we need to understand why the other 2 doors are locked forever. Let's start with austerity. The word sounds clinical, professional, responsible. But austerity is not a spreadsheet adjustment. It is economic violence. To fix America's debt problem through austerity, the numbers require something unimaginable. The government would need to cut spending or raise taxes by roughly $2 trillion every year. $2 trillion. To put that in perspective, that is more than the entire U.S. military budget, combined with the entire education budget, combined with veteran affairs, combined with infrastructure, all of it gone. Or the alternative. Every working American, from the janitor to the CEO, would see their income taxes double. If someone currently pays 30%, it becomes 60%. If they pay 15%, it becomes 30%. Imagine telling a middle-class family that half their paycheck now belongs to the government, not for new programs, not for better schools or roads, but just to pay interest on debts created decades ago by politicians they never voted for. What happens next is predictable. Consumer spending collapses, businesses close, unemployment skyrockets. The economy enters a death spiral. The Great Depression would look like a practice run. And here's the political reality. Any politician who even suggests cutting Social Security by 10% loses their seat. Any president who mentions raising taxes to European levels gets voted out in a landslide. The American voter has been conditioned for 70 years to expect benefits without payment. Austerity requires a society to accept shared sacrifice. But modern America is not that society. So the first door remains locked. Now, the second door, default, just walk away. Argentina did it multiple times. Russia did it in 1998. Greece almost did it in 2015. For a small country, default is painful, but survivable. But the United States is not a small country. The US dollar is not just another currency. It is the foundation of the entire global financial system. Every central bank on earth holds US Treasury bonds as reserves. Every international trade contract, from oil tankers to microchips, is settled in dollars. Every pension fund, every insurance company, every retirement account assumes US government debt is risk-free. If the United States defaults, even once, that assumption shatters. And when that assumption shatters, the dominoes fall instantly. Banks around the world hold trillions in treasury bonds as their safest assets. If those bonds become worthless overnight, those banks collapse. When banks collapse, credit disappears. When credit disappears, businesses cannot make payroll, supply chains freeze, grocery stores run out of food within days, gas stations shut down. This is not exaggeration. In 2008, the financial system nearly collapsed because of bad mortgages in a few U.S. states. A U.S. default would be 1,000 times worse. It would be the end of the global economy as we know it. So the United States cannot default, not because they are honorable, but because the consequences are unthinkable. The second door is also locked, which brings us to the third door, the door that is already open, the door every empire eventually walks through. Soft default, inflation. Here's how it works. The government borrowed money in 2020, let's say $1 trillion. They promised to pay it back with interest. And they will. They will pay every single dollar. But the trick is this. The dollars they pay back in 2030 will buy half as much as the dollars they borrowed in 2020. They are paying back the debt in currency they have deliberately devalued. It is legal, it is quiet, and it is devastatingly effective. Let's do the math. If the government owes $30 trillion and inflation runs at 5% per year, the real value of that debt shrinks by 5% annually. In 1 year, they have erased $1.5 trillion in purchasing power terms. Without raising a single tax, without cutting a single program, the bondholders get their money back, technically. But that money buys fewer groceries, fewer houses, fewer anything. The debt disappears, not from the balance sheet, but from reality. And the best part, most people never notice. They blame rising prices on supply chains, on corporate greed, on anything except the truth. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is the unspoken policy of the United States government. It is called financial repression, and it is happening right now. But to make this work, the government needs control. Control over interest rates, control over inflation measurements, control over who buys the debt, and that is where the machinery begins. There's a black and white photograph from 1946. It shows a long line of Americans stretching around a city block. They are standing outside a bank, not to withdraw money, but to buy government bonds, bonds that paid 2.5% interest. And while bread, milk, and rent were rising at 6% per year, these people were losing money. Every single day they held those bonds, but they bought them anyway. Why? Because the government had turned patriotism into a financial trap. Buy bonds to support the troops. Buy bonds to rebuild America. The propaganda was everywhere, and it worked. For 10 years, from 1945 to 1955, the American public funded their own robbery. They lent money to the government at rates that guaranteed loss. And when it was over, the U.S. debt to GDP ratio had dropped from 119% to 60%. Not because the debt was paid off, but because it was inflated away. The bondholders lost 35% of their purchasing power. The government won. Now, here's the terrifying part. That same playbook is being used again, but this time, they don't need propaganda posters. They don't need to convince anyone, because this time, they have built a machine that forces participation. Imagine this scenario. A man walks into a casino. The dealer tells him he must play, he cannot leave, he cannot cash out, and the house sets the rules. This is the modern banking system. In the years following the 2008 financial crisis, governments around the world introduced new regulations. Basel III, Dodd-Frank, a web of complex rules. On the surface, these rules were designed to make banks safer, to prevent another collapse. But buried deep inside these thousands of pages was a different mechanism, a trap. Banks were told they must hold something called high-quality liquid assets, HQLA. And the government decided what qualified as high-quality U.S. Treasury bonds, government debt, It doesn't matter if those bonds pay 0.1% interest. It doesn't matter if inflation is eating away their value. Banks must hold them by law. If a bank wants to operate, if it wants to accept deposits, if it wants to stay in business, it must buy government debt. This creates something extraordinary. Artificial demand in a free market. If a borrower is $38 trillion in debt and spending recklessly, lenders would demand higher interest rates, 10%, 15%, maybe more. But the US government cannot afford 10%. At 10% interest, the annual interest bill would be $3.8 trillion, more than the government collects in total tax revenue. So they rigged the game. They forced the market to lend the money at suppressed rates. Pension funds, insurance companies, and retirement accounts, all of them must buy treasury bonds. Not because it's a good investment, but because it's against the law not to. The American saver thinks their pension fund is making smart choices. The truth? Their pension fund is a hostage. There's a number the government releases every month. It is called the Consumer Price Index, CPI. This number is supposed to measure inflation, how much more expensive life has become, and this number controls trillions of dollars. Social Security payments are tied to CPI. Government pensions are tied to CPI. Inflation-protected bonds are tied to CPI. If CPI says inflation is 10%, the government must pay 10% more. So the government has a multi-billion-dollar reason to keep that number low, and they found a way. In the 1980s, the government began quietly rewriting how CPI is calculated. They introduced something called substitution bias. Here's how it works. If the price of steak doubles, the government assumes people will stop buying steak. They will buy hamburger instead. So the CPI doesn't track the price of steak. It tracks the price of hamburger, and the number stays lower, but the citizens' quality of life has dropped. They are eating worse food, but the government says inflation is under control. Then they introduced hedonic adjustments. If a new car costs $5,000 more than last year's model, but it has a better stereo system or slightly better brakes, the government argues the price didn't really go up. They adjust the number downward because the quality improved. Never mind that the family cannot afford the car anymore. The statistics say everything is fine. These tricks save the government billions every year. If CPI were still calculated using the 1980 formula, inflation today would be double the official number, maybe triple. The government is lying about the cost of survival, and they are doing it to protect their budget. There was a time when central banks were independent, when the Federal Reserve's job was to protect the value of the dollar, even if that meant hurting the government's finances. That time is over. Today, the Federal Reserve has a new master, the Treasury Department. Here's what happened. For decades, foreign countries like China and Japan bought U.S. debt. They lent America trillions of dollars, but in recent years, they stopped. China is selling treasury bonds, not buying them. Japan is reducing its holdings. So who is buying the debt now? The Federal Reserve. The Fed prints money and uses that money to buy government bonds. This is called quantitative easing, and it serves two purposes. First, it keeps interest rates artificially low. If nobody wants to buy the bonds, the price falls and the interest rate rises. But when the Fed steps in and buys, it props up the price and suppresses the rate. Second, it floods the economy with new dollars, trillions of new dollars, created from nothing. And those dollars have to go somewhere. They flow into stocks, real estate, cryptocurrency. Prices skyrocket. People look at their investment accounts and feel rich. But it's an illusion. They have more dollars. But each dollar is worth less. This is the everything bubble. And when it pops, the people holding cash will be the ones who lose everything. The machine is complete. Forced buyers, manipulated inflation data, and a central bank that prints on demand. This is not capitalism. This is controlled demolition, and the target is your savings. There's a man named Richard Cantillon. Most people have never heard of him. He died in 1734, nearly 300 years ago. But he understood something about money that most modern economists still refuse to admit. He discovered that when new money enters an economy, it doesn't spread evenly. It doesn't rain down like water on everyone equally. It flows like a river, and whoever stands closest to the source gets rich. Whoever stands downstream gets destroyed. This is called the Cantillon effect, and it is the secret engine behind the growing inequality tearing America apart. Here's how it works in 2024. When the Federal Reserve prints $1 trillion, they don't mail checks to teachers, nurses, or factory workers. They don't drop cash over small towns in the Midwest. They inject it into the financial system. They buy bonds from Goldman Sachs, JP Morgan, BlackRock. These institutions receive the new money first, fresh, printed, at zero interest, and they immediately deploy it They buy stocks, real estate, tech companies, art, anything that holds value. By the time this new money trickles down to the average worker, by the time it shows up in wages or paychecks, prices have already exploded, the rent has doubled, groceries cost 50% more, the worker gets the money after inflation, the banker got the money before inflation. This is why America now has a K-shaped economy. The top 10%, the people who own assets, have seen their wealth skyrocket. Their stock portfolios are up 300% since 2008. Their homes are worth double, triple what they paid. Meanwhile, the bottom 90%, the wage earners, are drowning. Their paychecks buy less every year. They cannot afford a house. They cannot save for retirement. The middle class is being liquidated, not by accident, but by design, because the national debt is being paid off by erasing the middle class. The death of safe savings. For 40 years, the advice was simple. Work hard. Save 10% of your income. Put it in a bank. Buy government bonds. Retire comfortably. This was the American dream. The 60-40 portfolio, 60% stocks, 40% bonds. It was designed for a world where money held its value. But that world is gone. In 2024, if someone saves money in a bank account earning 4% interest, and while real inflation is running at 8%, they're losing 4% of their wealth every single year. In 10 years, they will have lost 40% of their purchasing power. If someone buys a government bond today, they are guaranteed to lose. Because the interest rate is lower than inflation, the system has been designed to punish savers and reward gamblers. To preserve wealth now, a person must take risks. They must buy stocks, real estate, cryptocurrency. They must speculate just to stay even. The government has turned the entire economy into a casino where people must gamble just to survive. Because the safe option, saving, is being deliberately destroyed. But there is one last piece of the puzzle. One final tool the government has not yet deployed, but they are building it right now. In the basement of the Federal Reserve, it is called a central bank digital currency, CBDC. Right now, the government's control over money is limited because physical cash still exists. If the government sets interest rates negative to steal from savers directly, people can simply withdraw cash and hide it under the mattress. Physical cash is an escape hatch, a way to exit the system. But CBDC removes that option. If the dollar becomes purely digital, the Federal Reserve gains total control, and they can impose negative interest rates instantly. 1% of your balance disappears every month, automatically. You cannot stop it. You cannot withdraw. They can set expiration dates on money. Your stimulus check must be spent within 30 days, or it vanishes. They can control what you buy. No alcohol, no guns, no unapproved purchases. This is not science fiction. China is already testing this with the digital yuan. Citizens in certain cities can only spend their money on government-approved items. The expiration dates are real. The control is absolute. And the United States is watching and learning. The digital dollar is the ultimate solution to the debt crisis. It gives the government the power to micromanage every transaction, to confiscate wealth with a few keystrokes, to eliminate the ability to save outside the system. The transition to a cashless society is not about convenience. It is about control. It is about ensuring there is no escape. When the final phase begins, the historical warning, there is a precedent for this. April 5th, 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102. It made it illegal for American citizens to own gold. Anyone caught holding more than a small amount faced 10 years in prison. The government forced citizens to sell their gold to the Federal Reserve at a fixed price. Then, months later, the government revalued gold at a higher price. They confiscated wealth legally, under the cover of a national emergency. Today, the same legal framework still exists. The president has the power to seize assets during a crisis, gold, Bitcoin, retirement accounts, anything. If the debt spiral accelerates, if the system begins to collapse, the government will not ask permission. They will simply take the verdict. The United States is defaulting right now. It is not a sudden crash. It is not a dramatic announcement. It is slow, polite, bureaucratic, but it is a default nonetheless. The $38 trillion will never be paid back in real terms. The government is betting they can inflate the debt away faster than the public can panic. They are walking a tightrope. Print too slowly, the debt crushes them. Print too fast, hyperinflation destroys the currency, so they aim for the middle, 4 to 5% inflation for a decade. It sounds manageable, but the math is brutal. At 5% inflation, the value of savings is cut in half. every 14 years. By the mid-2030s, half the debt will be gone, and half of every American's savings will be gone with it. The winners in this system will be those who understand the game, those who own scarce assets, real estate that cannot be printed, gold that cannot be created by a computer, Bitcoin with a fixed supply, profitable businesses that generate real value. These are the lifeboats. The losers will be those who trust the system, those who keep their wealth in cash, those who believe government bonds are safe, those who think their savings account is protecting them. The American dream of saving your way to prosperity is dead. We are now in the era of asset survival, and the clock is ticking. The government has made their choice. They will not cut spending, they will not raise taxes, they will inflate, and they will do it quietly, until it is too late for most people to react. The question is not whether this will happen. The question is, what will you do about it? If you found this analysis valuable, hit that subscribe button, because the next video will expose the exact mechanisms of Executive Order 6102, the legal framework that allows asset seizure, and how modern investors can protect themselves. From boring currency, this is the warning. The debt is being erased, and so is your wealth. Unless you act now. Venezuela just went dark. Their silver mines, responsible for 12% of global supply, are offline. But that's not why the price exploded. The real reason is what happened in the 6 hours before the blackout. Something moved in the darkness. Something that wasn't supposed to move. Something that tells us this wasn't an accident. Let me take you back to December 23rd, Christmas weekend. The markets are closed. The traders are on vacation. The news cycle is dead. This is when they move. This is when they think nobody's watching. But we were watching. We had eyes on the ground. We had sources inside the Venezuelan mining sector. And what they told us will change everything you think you know about this crisis. At 2:47 a.m. Caracas time, 3 cargo planes departed Simon Bolivar International Airport. Destination, Miami International. Cargo manifest, mining equipment. But mining equipment doesn't weigh 847 tons. Mining equipment doesn't require armed escort to the tarmac. Mining equipment does not get loaded in the middle of the night when the airport is supposed to be closed. 847 tons. Let me repeat that number because it's crucial to understanding what really happened here. 847 tons of mining equipment loaded onto 3 aircraft in a 47-minute window. That's 18 tons per minute. That's 300 kilograms per second being moved from secure storage facilities to aircraft cargo holds. You don't move mining equipment that fast. You don't move mining equipment in the dark. You don't move mining equipment with military precision and 0 documentation trails. But you do move silver that way. You do move precious metals that way when you're trying to evacuate strategic reserves before a crisis hits. 847 tons of mining equipment. Let me put that in perspective for you. 847 tons is approximately 27 million troy ounces of refined silver. That's roughly 15% of Venezuela's entire annual silver production. That's more silver than most countries produce in 2 years, loaded onto planes in the dark, 6 hours before the mines went offline. But here's where the story gets really dark. Those 847 tons weren't random numbers pulled from thin air. Our analysis of Venezuelan silver production data shows that 847 tons represents the exact amount of refined silver that should have been sitting in Venezuelan central bank vaults as strategic reserves. Every sovereign nation keeps strategic metal reserves: gold, silver, platinum, insurance policies against currency collapse, emergency assets that can be liquidated in times of crisis. Venezuela's strategic silver reserve was estimated at 850 tons as of December 2024. 3 tons remained in the vaults. 847 tons departed on those flights. This wasn't an evacuation of mining equipment. This was the complete liquidation of Venezuela's sovereign silver reserves. This is where the timeline stops making sense. 2:47 a.m. 3 aircraft begin loading operations at Simon Bolivar International 3:15 a.m. Venezuelan military establishes perimeter around airport cargo terminals 3:52 a.m. All civilian flights diverted from Caracas airspace for maintenance operations. 4:18 a.m. First aircraft departs. Venezuelan airspace squawks emergency transponder code 4:41 a.m. Second aircraft airborne. Flight path direct to Miami International 5:33 a.m. Third aircraft wheels up, but here's the anomaly. This one turns northeast toward the Caribbean 6:15 a.m. All 3 planes are airborne 7:23 a.m. Venezuelan state television goes silent. 8:41 a.m. Power grid failures cascade across Zulia province. 9:58 a.m. Las Cristinas Mine reports technical difficulties. 10:34 a.m. El Callao mining complex evacuates all personnel. 11:12 a.m. Entire mining sector shuts down operations. 12:45 p.m., government declares national mining emergency. But here's what they didn't announce. Here's what you won't see in any press release. At 1:17 p.m., exactly 32 minutes after the mining emergency was declared, silver futures in New York jumped 7.8%. Not gradually, not over hours, in 4 minutes. A violent, explosive move that triggered trading halts across multiple exchanges. Someone knew, someone was positioned, someone was ready for this exact sequence of events. The market doesn't move like that on news. The market moves like that on information. Information that travels faster than headlines. Information that flows through channels that don't exist on your television screen. Information that comes from inside the operation itself. Because this wasn't just about moving silver. This was about timing the market. This was about positioning before the crisis hit. This was about turning a strategic metal evacuation into the largest commodity manipulation scheme in modern history. Let me show you the evidence. Let me show you the trading patterns that prove this was orchestrated from the highest levels. In the 72 hours before the Venezuelan blackout, silver call options volume increased by 2,147%, not 284%, 2,847%. Someone was buying massive quantities of leveraged bets that silver would spike violently upward. These weren't retail investors. Retail investors don't have access to the kind of capital we're talking about here. The average trade size was $47 million per position. These were institutional players. These were entities with inside information about what was coming. But it gets worse. The options weren't just calls, they were specifically calls with strike prices at 73, 77, and 82. Those weren't random numbers. Those were target prices. Price levels that someone knew the market would hit after the Venezuelan operation was complete. And they were right. Silver touched 73.40 on the day of the blackout. It hit $77.15 2 days later. It peaked at 82.77 exactly 1 week after the Venezuelan mines went dark. This wasn't market speculation. This was inside trading on geopolitical intelligence. This was monetizing a crisis that someone had advanced knowledge about. This brings us to the planes. Because those 3 cargo flights weren't the only metal moving that night. And they weren't the only flights that had inside information about the timeline. Flight tracking data shows a pattern that should terrify anyone who understands how the silver market actually works. Between midnight and 6 a.m. Caracas time, 11 aircraft departed Venezuelan airspace. Not 3, 11. Let me break down these flights for you because each one tells part of the story. Flights 1-3, the obvious ones. Simon Bolivar to Miami International, the decoy flights. The ones they wanted us to see, the ones carrying some silver but not the main cargo. Flights 4-5, departed from Maracaibo International. Destination, Panama City. These flights carried Venezuelan oil executives and their families. Emergency evacuation of key personnel before the crisis hit. Flights 6-7, departed from Puerto Ordaz, private airfield. No civilian traffic control. These flights carried mining equipment. Real mining equipment this time. Specialized extraction machinery worth hundreds of millions of dollars. But here's where it gets really interesting. Flights 8-9, Russian registration. Antonov An-124 cargo planes. The kind of aircraft you use when you need to move something very heavy, very far, very quietly. Departure point. Canaima National Park. A national park with no airports, no landing strips, no infrastructure for heavy cargo aircraft. Except there is infrastructure. Secret infrastructure, military infrastructure that doesn't appear on civilian maps, underground storage facilities connected to the Venezuelan silver mining network, storage facilities that have been accumulating refined silver for years. These Russian flights didn't just carry silver, they carried the accumulated production of Venezuelan mines that had been diverted from international markets for the past 18 months. Silver that should have been sold to industrial users, silver that should have been available to the global supply chain. Silver that was instead stockpiled in underground facilities waiting for this exact moment. How much silver? Our estimates based on cargo weight and aircraft capacity suggest these 2 flights carried approximately 1,200 tons of refined silver. That's 38 million ounces. That's more silver than Peru produces in an entire year. Flights 10-11. Here's where the story becomes a geopolitical nightmare. Chinese registration. Cargo aircraft operated by COSCO Shipping, the state-owned shipping conglomerate that moves strategic materials for the Chinese government. Departure point unknown, destination unknown. These flights disappeared from civilian radar immediately after takeoff. Military aircraft, military cargo, military secrecy. But we know they landed somewhere in the Caribbean before continuing to destinations that are classified at the state level. The Chinese weren't just observing the Venezuelan operation, they were participating in it. They were coordinating with the Russians to extract maximum silver reserves before the crisis hit. This is state-level resource warfare. This is economic espionage disguised as humanitarian crisis response. This is the beginning of something much larger than a Venezuelan power grid failure. Destinations included Miami, Panama City, and here's where it gets interesting, Moscow. 2 flights to Moscow. Russian registration, Antonov and An-124 cargo planes. The kind of aircraft you use when you need to move something very heavy, very far, very quietly. But the Moscow flights weren't direct. They made stops, strategic stops at locations that reveal the true scope of this operation. First stop, Minsk, Belarus. Officially a refueling stop, unofficially a transshipment point where Venezuelan silver gets repackaged, relabeled, and distributed to final destinations across the former Soviet sphere. Second stop, Astana, Kazakhstan. The heart of the Eurasian Silver Processing Network, where raw silver gets refined into industrial products for the Chinese manufacturing sector. Final destination, Moscow. The Russian Strategic Metal Reserve Complex, underground facilities where silver joins gold, platinum, and other strategic materials in vaults that are designed to survive nuclear war. Russian involvement in Venezuelan mining isn't new. Rosneft has had contracts in the region for years. But Rosneft extracts oil. These flights originated from mining territories. These flights carried cargo that required specialized loading equipment. These flights moved under diplomatic cover that protected them from international oversight. Someone emptied the Venezuelan silver reserves before the crisis hit. Someone with access to state-level logistics. Someone with the authority to move strategic materials across international borders without customs interference. Someone who knew exactly when the lights were going to go out. This wasn't a natural disaster. This was a controlled demolition of the Venezuelan mining sector, timed to maximize resource extraction and market manipulation. But the Venezuela story is just the surface, the tip of the iceberg. The visible part of an operation that goes much deeper than anyone in the Western financial system realizes. The real crisis is what this shortage reveals about the global silver market. Because when 12% of annual supply disappears overnight, the remaining 88% becomes visible. And what we're seeing in that remaining supply is a system on the verge of total collapse. Let me show you the numbers that the mining companies don't want you to see. Numbers that explain why Venezuela was targeted. Numbers that reveal the mathematical impossibility of the current silver market structure. Global silver mine production peaked in 2016 at 886 million ounces. Since then, production has been declining every year, not gradually, precipitously. 2017, 852 million ounces. 2018, 843 million ounces. 2019, 836 million ounces. 2020, 784 million ounces due to COVID shutdowns. 2021, 822 million ounces as mines reopened. 2022, 835 million ounces. 2023, 842 million ounces. 2024 is tracking at 831 million ounces. The decline is accelerating. The peak is behind us. The easy silver has been mined. What remains requires deeper shafts, more complex extraction, higher energy costs, greater environmental impact. The marginal cost of production is rising exponentially. But demand? Demand is exploding in directions that the mining companies never anticipated. Industrial demand alone increased 17% year over year. But let me break that down for you, because the headline number does not capture the crisis that's building. Solar panel manufacturing consumed 185 million ounces in 2024. That's 22% of total global mine production flowing into a single industrial sector. And that sector is growing at 35% annually. Do the math. By 2027, solar panel manufacturing alone will consume more silver than the entire world produces. Electric vehicle production consumed 61 million ounces. Traditional vehicles use about 20 grams of silver for electrical contacts and switches. Electric vehicles use 200 grams. That's a 10x increase per vehicle. Global EV production is growing at 28% annually. By 2028, the automotive sector will consume more silver than the jewelry industry. 5G infrastructure consumed 34 million ounces, but 5G is just the beginning. 6G infrastructure will require silver-based quantum computing components. Artificial intelligence data centers need silver for high-frequency processing units. The technology sector's silver consumption is accelerating exponentially. Defense applications consume 28 million ounces. Military radar systems, missile guidance systems, satellite communications, electronic warfare equipment. As geopolitical tensions escalate, military demand for silver is becoming a national security priority for every major power. Medical applications consume 19 million ounces. Silver-based antimicrobial coatings for hospital equipment. Silver nanoparticles for drug delivery systems. Silver electrodes for diagnostic equipment. The healthcare sector's demand is recession-proof and politically protected. The deficit is real. The shortage is mathematical. Annual demand is now running at 1.1 billion ounces. Annual supply is falling toward 800 million ounces. The deficit is 300 million ounces and growing every year. What happened in Venezuela didn't create the crisis. It exposed it. It accelerated it. It turned a manageable supply shortage into a strategic emergency that threatens the industrial base of every developed economy. Here's what the Venezuelan blackout really represents. It represents the moment when strategic actors realize that silver scarcity is now a national security issue. It represents the beginning of resource hoarding at the state level. It represents the end of the free market in strategic metals. Because those planes that left Caracas, they weren't heading to random destinations. They weren't carrying cargo for profit-maximizing corporations. They were heading to countries that have been quietly accumulating silver reserves as part of strategic resource warfare against the dollar-based international monetary system. China's strategic silver reserves are classified information. But import data tells the story. In 2024, China imported 247 million ounces of silver. That's 30% of global mine production flowing into a single country. But here's the crucial detail. China's industrial silver consumption is only 180 million ounces annually. Where is the extra 67 million ounces going? Into state reserves, into strategic stockpiles, into underground facilities that are designed to survive economic warfare. China isn't importing silver for industrial use only. China is stockpiling silver for the same reason they stockpiled gold, because they know the dollar-based monetary system is dying. And they know that when it dies, countries with strategic metal reserves will have enormous advantage in the new system that replaces it. Russia's silver reserves? Also classified. But Russian silver exports dropped to near zero in 2024, despite mine production remaining constant at 45 million ounces annually. Where's that metal going? Into state vaults, into strategic reserves, into the same underground storage facilities where they keep their gold. Russia understands that silver is money, real money, money that can't be printed, money that can't be sanctioned, money that maintains value when fiat currencies collapse. Every ounce of silver that Russia accumulates is an ounce that strengthens their position in economic warfare against the West. India's silver imports hit record highs every quarter. 2024 imports exceeded 270 million ounces. That's more silver than Mexico produces, more silver than Peru produces. India is vacuuming up global silver supply through every available channel. But India's silver imports aren't going to jewelry manufacturers. They're going to the Reserve Bank of India through shell companies and offshore entities. India is building strategic silver reserves as part of their de-dollarization strategy. This is the new reality. Nation-states are treating silver like a strategic weapon, like uranium, like rare earth elements, like any resource that provides military and economic advantage. And the Venezuelan operation was just the opening move in a much larger game. Because here's what happens next. Here's the cascade that the Venezuelan crisis just triggered. Here's the sequence of events that will unfold over the next 18 months as the silver shortage transitions from theoretical to catastrophic. Phase 1, supply shock recognition. The market realizes that 12% of annual supply is offline indefinitely. Price spikes immediately. Inventory hoarding begins. This is where we are now. Phase 2, industrial panic. Manufacturing companies realize that their supply chains are vulnerable. They start building strategic stockpiles. Just-in-time inventory management dies. Companies start hoarding silver like toilet paper during COVID. Demand increases while supply decreases. Price acceleration begins. Phase 3, financial system stress. Banks that are short silver through derivatives and paper contracts face margin calls they cannot meet. The paper silver market starts to break down. Physical premiums explode. The disconnect between paper prices and physical prices becomes impossible to ignore. Phase 4, government intervention. Central banks realize that silver scarcity threatens industrial production and national security. They start acquiring silver reserves directly using freshly printed currency. The free market ends. Strategic allocation begins. Phase 5, currency implications. As silver becomes scarce and strategically controlled, its role as a monetary metal resurfaces. Countries with silver reserves gain enormous leverage in international trade. The dollar's purchasing power for strategic materials collapses. Phase 6, resource warfare. Countries use silver reserves as economic weapons. Supply is restricted to allies. Enemies are cut off from access. Trade wars become resource wars. The global economy fractures along resource control lines. We are currently in Phase 2. The Venezuelan blackout pushed us from Phase 1 to Phase 2 in a single day. The progression from here is automatic. It's physics. It's mathematics. It's geopolitics. It's unstoppable. The Venezuelan silver is gone. It's not coming back. Those mines will eventually restart, but the metal that was stored there, that's in Moscow now. That's in Beijing now. That's in strategic reserves controlled by countries that are actively working to destroy the dollar-based international monetary system. Every ounce of silver that disappears into state reserves is an ounce that will never return to the free market. Every ton of metal that gets nationalized reduces the available supply forever. Every crisis that gets manufactured creates precedent for the next crisis. We are watching the end of commodity markets as we know them. We are watching the beginning of resource nationalism. We are watching the dawn of scarcity warfare. The lights went out in Venezuela. But the real darkness is what that blackout revealed about the future of strategic materials. The game has changed. The rules have changed. The players have changed. And by the time the Western world wakes up to what's really happening, the vaults will be empty, the reserves will be gone, the metal will be controlled by countries that have no intention of selling it back to us at any price. Venezuela was just the beginning. But there's something else we need to discuss. Something that makes the Venezuelan operation even more sinister than resource theft. Something that reveals this wasn't just about silver. This was about testing Western response capabilities. This was about probing defenses. This was about measuring reaction times. Russia and China now know exactly how long it takes Western intelligence agencies to recognize resource warfare. They know how long it takes Western governments to coordinate response. They know how long it takes Western media to investigate and report. The answer is too long. By the time Western analysts figured out what happened in Venezuela, the operation was complete, and the perpetrators had moved on to planning the next target. This intelligence gathering was part of the operation's value. Russia and China now have precise measurements of Western defensive capabilities around strategic resource protection. They know the gaps in surveillance. They know the delays in response. They know the weaknesses in coordination. This intelligence will be applied to future operations. The next resource extraction will be faster, more efficient, more complete. The gaps in Western defenses will be exploited more effectively. We are fighting a war that we don't even know we're in. While Western governments debate inflation statistics and trade deficits, Eastern powers are systematically dismantling Western industrial capacity through resource control. But there's another layer to this operation that reveals the true scope of what we're dealing with. Because this wasn't just about testing defenses. This was about financial warfare on a scale that most people can't comprehend. Follow the money, not just the silver money, all the money. In the 72 hours surrounding the Venezuelan blackout, currency markets experienced anomalous trading patterns that have never been properly explained by financial media. The Russian ruble strengthened against the dollar by 3.2%, despite no positive economic news from Russia. The Chinese yuan gained 2.1% against the dollar, despite concerns about Chinese real estate markets. The Venezuelan bolivar, which should have collapsed during an infrastructure crisis, actually stabilized. These currency movements make no sense unless you understand that they were coordinated with the silver operation. Russia and China weren't just stealing silver. They were using the operation to attack the dollar's reserve currency status. Here's how it works. When Western countries lose access to strategic materials, they're forced to buy those materials from Eastern suppliers using Eastern currencies. This increases demand for rubles and yuan while decreasing demand for dollars. The Venezuelan silver that disappeared into Russian and Chinese vaults will now be sold back to Western companies. But the sales will be denominated in rubles and yuan, not dollars. Samsung will have to buy rubles to purchase the silver they need for batteries. Tesla will have to buy yuan to secure supply for vehicle production. This forces Western companies to accumulate Eastern currencies, which weakens the dollar and strengthens Eastern monetary systems. Resource control becomes currency control. Strategic material dominance becomes monetary dominance. The Venezuelan operation wasn't just theft, it was the opening move in a coordinated attack on dollar hegemony through resource warfare. And it's working. Because every ounce of silver that disappears from Western control is an ounce that must be purchased using Eastern currencies when Western companies need it. The silver market is becoming a dollar destruction mechanism. Every spike in silver prices forces Western companies to seek alternative suppliers, which drives demand for alternative currencies, which weakens the dollar's global position. Russia and China have turned silver scarcity into a monetary weapon. They're using Western industrial dependence on strategic materials to force de-dollarization at the corporate level. This explains why the Venezuelan operation was so precisely coordinated between Russia and China. This wasn't just about accumulating silver reserves. This was about creating a commodity-backed monetary system that bypasses the dollar entirely. The new system works like this. Russia provides energy, China provides manufacturing, and both countries control the strategic materials that make modern technology possible. Countries that want access to this system must hold rubles and yuan. Countries that remain loyal to the dollar find themselves cut off from essential materials. Venezuela was the test case, the proof of concept, the demonstration that resource warfare can fracture the global monetary system along geopolitical lines. If this strategy succeeds, if Western countries are forced to abandon dollar-based trade for strategic materials, the dollar's reserve currency status dies. American economic dominance dies with it. We're not just watching the end of the silver market. We're watching the end of the Bretton Woods monetary system that has defined global finance for 80 years. But the financial architecture goes deeper than simple currency attacks. Let me show you the money laundering operation that makes this resource theft possible. Because this isn't just about moving metal, this is about creating untraceable value transfer on a scale that would make traditional criminals jealous. The Venezuelan silver didn't just disappear physically, it disappeared financially. Here's how the accounting magic works. Step 1. The Venezuelan government declares force majeure on all silver export contracts due to infrastructure failure. This releases them from legal obligations to deliver metal to legitimate buyers. Step 2. The stranded silver gets sold at distressed prices to shell companies registered in Dubai, Cyprus, and the British Virgin Islands. These shell companies are ultimately owned by Russian state entities, but the ownership is buried under 17 layers of corporate structure. Step 3. The shell companies immediately resell the silver to Chinese state refineries at massive markup. The profit gets distributed through cryptocurrency exchanges and hawala banking networks. Step 4. The Chinese refineries melt down the silver, removing all trace of Venezuelan origin, and rebrand it as Chinese strategic reserves. The entire operation generates billions in untraceable profit while transferring strategic materials from Western-aligned countries to the Russia-China axis. It's the perfect crime. And it's completely legal under international law because the Venezuelan government technically owns the metal and can sell it to whoever they want during a declared emergency. This financial architecture explains why the operation was so precisely timed. The infrastructure failure wasn't random. It was scheduled to coincide with maximum financial advantage. December 23rd was chosen because it's the last trading day before Christmas week. Any suspicious trading activity gets buried in holiday low-volume noise. Regulatory oversight is minimal. Financial journalists are on vacation. The timing also coincides with year-end corporate inventory accounting. Many Western companies were planning to take delivery of Venezuelan silver in January for their 2025 production schedules. By declaring force majeure on December 23rd, Venezuela could cancel those contracts without penalty and redirect the metal to higher-paying buyers. But here's the truly sinister part. The Western companies that lost their silver contracts don't even know it yet. They're still expecting delivery in January. They're going to wake up on January 2nd to force majeure notices that their silver is no longer available. Samsung was expecting 347 tons of Venezuelan silver for their solid-state battery production line. Tesla had contracts for 234 tons. Apple secured 156 tons for their new quantum computing chips. That metal is now sitting in Moscow vaults. These companies will be forced into the spot market in January, competing for supply that no longer exists. This will trigger the industrial panic that drives the next phase of the crisis. The financial implications are staggering. Samsung's solid-state battery program was budgeted, assuming silver at $45 per ounce. If they have to secure supply at $85 per ounce, their production costs double. Their entire business model breaks down. Tesla's Model S Plaid Plus was designed around specific silver allocation contracts at predetermined prices. If those contracts are voided, Tesla faces a choice: redesign the vehicle or absorb massive cost overruns that destroy profit margins. Apple's quantum chip roadmap depends on specific silver purity standards that only a few refineries can provide. Venezuelan silver was crucial to their 2026 product launches. Without it, Apple faces production delays that could cost billions in market share. This is economic warfare at the corporate level. By controlling strategic metal supplies, Russia and China can now dictate terms to Western technology companies. They can delay product launches, they can force design changes, they can extract tribute payments disguised as premium pricing. The Venezuela operation was a proof of concept for technological extortion through resource control, and the Western governments are completely helpless to stop it. Because the metal transfer was technically legal, there's no basis for economic sanctions. Because the timing coincides with infrastructure failure, there's no proof of coordination. Because the financial transfers were structured through legitimate shell companies, there's no evidence of money laundering. Russia and China have found the perfect weapon: legal resource warfare through manufactured crisis. This brings us to the deeper question. How long has this been planned? How far back does this operation go? Because the precision of the execution suggests years of preparation. Our analysis of Venezuelan silver production data reveals disturbing patterns that go back to 2019. Starting in January 2019, Venezuelan silver exports began declining despite stable mine production. Where was that metal going? Instead of selling to traditional buyers in North America and Europe, Venezuela quietly redirected silver exports to Russian and Chinese refineries. Over 5 years, approximately 4,200 tons of Venezuelan silver flowed east instead of west. This wasn't market-driven. Russian and Chinese buyers were paying premiums of 8 to 12% above spot price for Venezuelan silver. They were deliberately overpaying to secure strategic reserves while depleting Western supply chains. The December 23rd operation wasn't the beginning of Venezuelan silver accumulation. It was the end. It was the final extraction of the last remaining reserves after 5 years of gradual resource transfer. Russia and China didn't steal 38 million ounces in one night. They stole 135 million ounces over 5 years. The December operation was just the final cleanup. This explains why the market reaction was so extreme. The silver market had been gradually tightening for years due to this hidden resource transfer. When the final reserves disappeared, the mathematical deficit became visible all at once. The 300 million ounce annual deficit that we calculated, that deficit has been building for years. We're not facing a future shortage. We're facing the revelation of a shortage that already exists. Venezuelan silver wasn't just 12% of annual production. It was 12% of the remaining available supply after years of Eastern accumulation. Losing that final 12% didn't create scarcity. It exposed scarcity that was already baked into the system. This is why the price explosion was so violent. This is why industrial buyers are panicking. This is why Western governments are waking up to strategic metal vulnerability. The free market in silver ended years ago. We just didn't know it. I need you to stop what you're doing right now. Close the other tabs, put your phone on, do not disturb, and look at the screen. What you're seeing on the mainstream news tickers, the talk of restoring democracy or counter-narcotics operations in South America, is a carefully constructed smokescreen. It is a narrative designed for the 99% who still believe that geopolitical movements of this magnitude are about ideology. But you are here because you know better. You are here because you understand that in the year 2026, every bomb dropped and every regime toppled is a move on a global chessboard of resource securitization. Specifically, what happened on January 3rd, 2026 in Caracas wasn't just a military strike, it was the opening salvo of a global resource war, and the primary target isn't oil, it's silver. My name is Kevin Huang, and this is Markets in Context. If you want the truth behind the headlines, hit the subscribe button right now because the window of opportunity to position yourself for what's coming is closing in real time. Let's look at the ground truth. At 2 a.m. VET on January 3rd, 2026, the capital city of Caracas was rocked by a series of precision airstrikes. This wasn't a warning shot. Residents reported low-flying aircraft and explosions centered on the Fort Tiuna military complex, the nerve center of the Venezuelan Ministry of Defense, and the La Carlota Air Base. This was Operation Southern Spear, a high-risk decapitation strike executed by the Joint Special Operations Command, or JSOC. We're talking about Elite Units Delta Force and the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment infiltrating the presidential residence while the Venezuelan National Guard was paralyzed by localized electronic warfare. President Nicolas Maduro and First Lady Cilia Flores were captured and extracted via helicopter to the USS Iwo Jima, an amphibious assault ship positioned off the coast. The U.S. administration characterized this as a surgical removal of a criminal regime, citing unsealed indictments for narco-terrorism to provide a legal veneer. But let's look at the timing. This kinetic action represents the most significant U.S. military intervention in Latin America since the 1989 invasion of Panama. Why now? Why this level of risk? The answer lies in a fracturing global order where just-in-time supply chains have been replaced by might-is-right resource acquisition. To understand the silver target, you first have to understand the excuse they used to get through the door, the heavy, crude bottleneck. The mainstream media is fixated on the fact that Venezuela sits on the world's largest energy reserves, but they'll tell you that Venezuelan oil production had already atrophied to roughly 900,000 barrels per day due to years of mismanagement. On paper, the removal of those barrels shouldn't crash the world. But paper isn't reality. The reality is the quality of that crude. Venezuela produces Murray 16, a heavy, sour crude that is absolutely essential for complex refineries in the U.S. Gulf Coast and China's Shandong province. These multi-billion-dollar industrial complexes cannot simply switch to the light, sweet shale oil produced in the Permian Basin. Without Murray 16, the diesel crack spread widens immediately, threatening the very fuel that moves the global economy. When President Trump asserted that the U.S. is in the oil business and would run Venezuela temporarily, he was signaling a strategic shift toward direct resource securitization. Analysts are calling this the Trump corollary to the Monroe Doctrine, a modern, aggressive interpretation that basically states, If a resource is vital to U.S. national security and it's being mismanaged by a hostile regime, the U.S. will take it. But here is where the energy narrative fails and the silver reality begins. Operation Southern Spear didn't happen in a vacuum. It was a kinetic accelerant for a silver market that was already in the throes of a historic supply-side crisis. Just 48 hours before the first bombs fell on Caracas on January 1st, 2026, the People's Republic of China detonated a silent bomb in the global supply chain by implementing aggressive export controls on silver. The confluence of the China shock and the Venezuela shock has fundamentally broken the traditional pricing models for precious metals. For years, silver was the forgotten stepchild of gold. It was traded as a commodity, a secondary asset. But in the opening days of 2026, silver has decoupled from its historic tether to gold. It is now trading as a critical strategic asset essential for both industrial continuity and monetary survival. While the immediate military objectives in Caracas appear to have been achieved with tactical precision, the economic shockwaves are only beginning to be felt. The escalation to this point was calculated. Throughout 2025, the geopolitical temperature rose in a sequence of events that the market chose to ignore. Following the disputed 2024 elections, the return of the Trump administration signaled a departure from diplomatic containment to active encirclement. By November 2025, the deployment of the USS Gerald R. Ford aircraft carrier strike group, accompanied by F-35 stealth fighters to the Caribbean, was publicly justified as a counter-narcotics operation against the Tren de Aragua syndicate. But the market signal was clear. The FAA had issued NOTAMs for Venezuelan airspace, and a naval blockade of oil tankers was ordered, effectively zeroing out exports. The strike on January 3rd was the final piece of the resource denial strategy. By removing the Maduro regime, the U.S. didn't just target oil, they targeted the Arco Minero del Orinoco, a 112,000 square kilometer zone rich in gold, diamonds, coltan, and most importantly, silver. Under the previous regime, this area was a state-sponsored illicit economy, where silver and gold were smuggled to Turkey and the UAE to bypass sanctions. The U.S. strike has disrupted these protection networks, creating an immediate supply freeze that has halted the flow of illicit metal to international black markets. When global markets opened on Monday, January 5th, 2026, the volatility was unlike anything we've seen in the modern era. Brent crude prices rose to the $62 to $65 range, but it was the internal spreads that signaled the real stress. More importantly, silver prices, which had already seen a gamma squeeze in late December due to anticipation of the China ban, surged toward $80 per ounce. You have to understand the psychology of this move. Geopolitical crises often trigger a run on the bank in commodities. When investors see airstrikes on a sovereign nation and the capture of its leadership, they don't look for more paper contracts. They fear counterparty risk. They fear the weaponization of the financial system itself. The Venezuela crisis, following immediately on the heels of the China export ban, has created a double-engine event where industrial demand and monetary demand fire simultaneously. Within Venezuela itself, the collapse of the fiat system has been instantaneous and catastrophic. The Bolivar Soberano has hit a terminal velocity collapse. On the black market, the only market that matters for survival right now, the exchange rate gapped to 560 VEs USD within hours of the strike. With the central bank of Venezuela ceasing to function, pricing has reverted to pure speculation and barter. This is where the survival valuation of silver becomes a reality. In the streets of Caracas, prices for basic necessities like bread or fuel are being quoted exclusively in USD or grams of silver flakes. This isn't just a Venezuelan problem, it's a blueprint for the empire risk that is now being priced into every major currency. Non-aligned nations, the BRICS Plus bloc, are watching the direct military seizure of a sovereign nation and its resources, and they are coming to one conclusion. If the U.S. can seize Venezuela's wealth and leadership by force, no asset held in dollars is truly safe. This is accelerating a trend that was already in motion. Central banks and institutional investors are bypassing fiat entirely for hard assets. As the war premium battles the industrial floor, silver is proving to be more resilient than gold. While gold hit new all-time highs above $4,445 per ounce on the Monday open. Driven by the belief that the U.S. would finance the occupation through massive debt expansion, silver is the asset that the industrial giants are panicking over. If you are a manufacturer of solar panels or electric vehicles, you don't care about the debasement trade. You care about the physical metal that is no longer coming out of China and is now locked behind a military blockade in Venezuela. The U.S. intervention is predicated on a transition to a friendly government led by the opposition, with plans for the mass privatization of the mining sector. They want to professionalize extraction and bring in Western majors to dismantle the criminal fiefdoms in the mining arc, but that will take years. In the short term, Venezuelan silver production is effectively offline. This creates a structural deficit that cannot be filled by the remaining global mines, which are already struggling with falling ore grades and a lack of new investment. We are entering a phase of shock reversal and breakout, where the convergence of supply fear from the east and war fear from the south is driving silver to retest its all-time highs. This is not a drill. This is the re-rating of silver as a measure of global instability and industrial necessity. The resource war is no longer a theoretical concept in a white paper. It is a kinetic reality unfolding in the Caribbean. To understand why the resource war has moved from a boardroom theory to a kinetic reality, you have to look at the calendar. While the airstrikes on Fort Tiuna were the visible eruption, the true seismic shift happened 48 hours earlier, on January 1st, 2026. This was the day the People's Republic of China detonated a silent bomb in the global supply chain, and it is the reason why the U.S. military is currently patrolling the streets of Caracas. The China shock was not a military maneuver, but a regulatory decapitation that left the Western industrial complex staring into a void. On the first morning of 2026, the People's Republic of China implemented what analysts are calling a draconian export licensing system for silver. The mechanism, directed by the Ministry of Commerce, or MOFCOM, was designed to act as a geopolitical filter. Under these new rules, only state-approved firms with production capacities exceeding 80 tons and credit lines over $30 million are permitted to export silver. This isn't just a tax or a minor hurdle. It is a soft ban that effectively places a geopolitical gatekeeper between roughly 121 million ounces of annual supply and the global market. You have to realize that China is not just another producer. They are the world's largest refiner of silver and the dominant supplier of the silver paste required for photovoltaic solar panels. By tightening the valve on these exports, Beijing isn't just seeking to raise prices. They are executing a strategic move to secure resources for their own massive solar and electric vehicle manufacturing targets, what they call the Green Leap Forward. This was the ultimate retaliation against U.S. semiconductor sanctions. It signaled to the world that silver is no longer just a commodity used for jewelry or investment coins. It has been re-rated as a strategic critical mineral. This is where the China shock and the Venezuela shock converge into a singular explosive market condition. When MOFCOM locked the gates on 121 million ounces of supply, the Western Hemisphere was suddenly forced to look at its own reserves with a sense of desperate urgency. The United States realized that it could no longer rely on a steady flow of refined silver from the East to balance its internal deficits. It had to secure the Western Hemisphere's largest remaining untapped resources by any means necessary. This is the true context of Operation Southern Spear. The capture of Maduro wasn't just about ending a narco-state. It was about ensuring that the mineral wealth of the Orinoco mining arc, an area of 112,000 square kilometers, rich in gold, diamonds, and critical silver, remained within the U.S. sphere of influence. The reaction from the Eurasian bloc confirms that Beijing and Moscow saw through the U.S. Common democracy narrative immediately. Moscow didn't mince words, labeling the JSOC operation an abduction and an act of war. Beijing, which holds billions in Venezuelan debt and has significant investments in the Orinoco mining arc, criticized the cowboy-like conduct and bullying of the U.S. administration. To Beijing, the strike was a direct threat to their own energy and resource security. It confirmed their worst fears, that U.S. foreign policy has shifted from economic containment to kinetic resource denial. This shift has created a paradigm shift in how silver is priced. Historically, silver has been tethered to gold, moving in a predictable ratio. But in the opening days of 2026, we are witnessing a fundamental decoupling. Silver is now trading as a critical strategic asset, essential for industrial continuity. And while gold is rising based on the debasement trade, the expectation that the U.S. will print trillions to fund this new era of intervention, silver is rising because of a physical vacuum. Look at the price progression. In early December 2025, silver was trading around $56, driven by standard Fed rate cut expectations and organic demand from the solar sector. By late December, as rumors of the China export ban began to circulate and the U.S. naval blockade of Venezuela intensified, we saw a gamma squeeze that pushed the price to an all-time high of $84.01 on December 29th. After a brief correction on January 1st, as traders digested the MOFCOM mechanics, the Venezuela strike on January 3rd acted as a shock reversal, sending prices back into the $75 to $78 range. As we hit the first full week of January 2026, we are entering the breakout phase. This is what I call a double-engine event, a rare phenomenon where industrial demand and monetary demand fire simultaneously. On one side, you have the industrial giants who are panicking. They see the China ban and the Venezuela blockade and realize their just-in-time supply chains have just been decapitated. On the other side, you have the safe haven flows from investors who are terrified of the escalating resource war between the US and the Eurasian bloc. You have to understand the industrial floor that is now supporting this price. Unlike gold, which is largely held in vaults as a store of value, silver is being consumed at a record pace. The green leap forward in China and the energy transition in the West mean that the need for silver and solar panels is not optional. It is a technological requirement. When you add a war premium on top of this industrial floor, you create a price floor that is incredibly resilient to corrections. Even if the immediate fear of a broader conflict in the Caribbean fades, the structural deficit caused by China's export controls will remain a permanent fixture of the market. The U.S. intervention in Venezuela has effectively securitized the silver market. By removing a hostile regime that was using the nation's mineral wealth to fund an illicit economy, the U.S. is attempting to bring those resources into a regulated, Western-aligned system. But the process of professionalizing the Orinoco mining arc will not happen overnight. Under the Maduro administration, the mining arc was carved up into fiefdoms controlled by military units and criminal syndicates like the ELN and Tren de Aragua. These groups used mercury-intensive, destructive mining practices to extract metal that was then smuggled to Turkey and the UAE to bypass sanctions. The U.S. strike has disrupted these illicit protection networks. But in the short term, it has also frozen the supply. Smugglers have gone to ground, fearing U.S. interdiction assets, and the flow of illicit silver to international black markets has completely halted. This creates a temporary vacuum in the global supply of off-market silver, further tightening the squeeze on refined metal. We are currently in a state of commodity dislocation. The old rules, where you could simply check the spot price on a screen and assume that was the price you would pay for metal, are dead. In Venezuela, this is already a reality. While the NYMEX and COMEX trade paper contracts, the traders in Caracas are dealing with survival valuations. Because the Bolivar has hit a terminal velocity collapse gapping from 300 to 560 VES per dollar in a single day, silver has been elevated to a primary medium of exchange. In this environment, physical silver trades at a massive fear premium. If the global spot price is $75, an ounce in a conflict zone like Caracas might trade for $100 worth of food or fuel. This reflects the utility of silver as an untraceable, indestructible store of wealth that can buy survival when the banking system fails. Paradoxically, we also see a distressed discount, where desperate families liquidate silver jewelry at 50% of spot value just to buy calories from opportunistic buyers with cash dollars. This divergence between the screen price and ground reality is a warning for global investors. The technical structure of the silver market is currently being tested by a run-on-the-bank dynamic. Geopolitical crises incentivize contract holders to stand for physical delivery rather than rolling over their positions, as they fear counterparty risk and the weaponization of the financial system itself. This is hitting a market that was already structurally imbalanced. By late 2025, the ratio of paper silver, futures contracts to registered physical inventory on the COMEX had blown out to a staggering 356 to 1. That means for every single ounce of physical silver available for delivery, there are 356 paper claims on that same ounce. The Venezuela crisis has been the catalyst that has forced the market to look at this math. With COMEX inventories already down 70% since 2020, the sudden spike in delivery demands has met a hollowed-out inventory, leading to the violent upside volatility we are seeing, a classic short squeeze driven not by retail traders, but by geopolitical necessity. Investors are now bypassing fiat currency entirely for hard assets. They are watching the U.S. military seize the leadership and resources of a sovereign nation, and they are coming to a realization. Empire risk is real. If the rules of the game can change overnight, if a nation's energy and mineral reserves can be nationalized or seized by force, then no asset held in the dollar-based financial system is truly safe. This is accelerating the trend of central banks, especially in the BRICS Plus bloc, buying physical gold and silver and repatriating it to their own vaults. They are moving into non-sovereign bearer assets as insurance against a world where trust has been replaced by kinetic force. The Caracas. Kinetic has proven that the scramble for resources is the defining feature of the 21st century geopolitical landscape. The perfect storm of the China export ban and Operation Southern Spear has hit the silver market with a regulatory supply shock and a geopolitical demand shock simultaneously. The result is a permanent re-rating of silver as a measure of global instability and industrial survival. We are no longer looking at a standard bull market. We are looking at the birth of a silver supercycle that is being fueled by the atoms required for the future and the bombs being dropped in the present. To truly understand the magnitude of the pressure cooker that just exploded, you have to look past the headlines of special forces and airstrikes and peer into the dark mechanical heart of the global financial system. the COMEX Futures Exchange. What we are witnessing right now is not just a price spike, it is a systemic fracture of the paper silver market. For decades, the price of silver has been dictated by the trading of digital contracts, promises to deliver metal at a future date. But as the smoke rises over Caracas, the world is waking up to a terrifying mathematical reality that the establishment has tried to hide for years. By late 2025, the structural imbalance on the COMEX had reached a terminal point, where the ratio of paper silver to registered physical inventory had blown out to a staggering 356 to 1. Think about that number. Let it sink in. For every single ounce of physical silver sitting in a registered vault, ready for delivery, there are 356 digital claims on that same ounce. In a period of peace and stable supply chains, this hallucination can be maintained through a process of rolling over contracts and cash settlements. But the moment you introduce a shock reversal, like Operation Southern Spear, the psychology changes instantly. Geopolitical crises of this magnitude trigger what is known in the commodity world as a run on the bank. Investors, sovereign wealth funds, and industrial manufacturers stop looking for a cash profit on a screen and start demanding the metal itself. They are standing for physical delivery because they no longer trust the counterparty to fulfill the contract in a world where the rules of the game are being rewritten by kinetic force. This run on the COMEX is hitting a system that was already hollowed out. Since 2020, physical silver inventories in registered vaults have plummeted by 70%. We're not talking about a temporary dip in supply. We are talking about a multi-year industrial drain that has left the vaults near empty. The sudden spike in delivery demands, incentivized by the uncertainty of global logistics and the crumbling rule of law, has met a void. This is the definition of a classic short squeeze, but on a scale that dwarfs the retail frenzy of 2021. This is a short squeeze driven by the survival instincts of the largest players in the global economy. The technical structure of this breakout is unique because it is destroying the traditional correlations that traders have relied on for generations. Historically, when the US dollar strengthens, silver and gold tend to fall, a phenomenon known as the dollar wrecking ball. We saw this clearly during the 2022 Russia-Ukraine crisis, where silver spiked briefly before being crushed by a surging dollar. But 2026 is different. Right now, silver is rising alongside the dollar. This is a rare and ominous signal. It indicates that the fear in the market is no longer just about inflation or interest rates. It is about the weaponization of the financial system itself. When investors see the U.S. move from economic sanctions to the direct military seizure of a sovereign nation's leadership and resources, they realize that empire risk is no longer a fringe theory. It is a reality that makes any fiat-denominated asset, even the dollar itself, vulnerable to overnight policy changes. This is why we're seeing a massive flight to hard assets that exist outside the traditional banking perimeter. Investors are bypassing the digital promises and moving into non-sovereign bearer assets. They want the physical bar in their possession because it carries no counterparty risk. This shift in behavior is what allowed gold to smash through all-time highs, crossing $4,445 per ounce as the Monday markets opened following the strike. The debasement trade is in full swing, as the market bets that the U.S. will finance the occupation of Venezuela and the subsequent reconstruction through massive debt expansion, further eroding the purchasing power of the dollar. But silver is the metal that is truly outperforming. While gold moves on the fear of debt, silver is moving on the fear of physical scarcity. Unlike the Hunt brothers' manipulation of 1980, which was a purely financial play based on cornering the market with leverage, the 2026 silver spike is built on a fundamental industrial reality. The shortage is real. It is being driven by the voracious industrial consumption of the East, primarily China's green leap forward, and the sudden geopolitical lockup of Western Hemisphere resources in Venezuela. This decoupling from gold is the most significant development in the precious metals sector in our lifetime. Silver is being re-rated from a precious metal to a strategic technology metal. It is the indispensable atom for the modern world. You cannot build a high-efficiency solar panel, an electric vehicle powertrain, or advanced military electronics without silver. There is no substitute. When China implemented the MOFCOM export licensing system on January 1st, they effectively declared silver a controlled strategic material, much like rare earth elements or advanced semiconductors. This move, 48 hours before the Caracas strike, set the stage for the current explosion because it removed the safety valve of Chinese refined supply from the global market. Now, with the U.S. Navy blockading Venezuelan ports and the JSOC team securing the ground, the war premium is battling the industrial floor. The industrial floor refers to the fact that even if the kinetic conflict in South America were to de-escalate tomorrow, the demand for silver from the renewable energy sector is not optional. It is a structural requirement of the global economy. This dual demand structure warfare on top of industrial necessity makes silver far more resilient to price corrections than gold. In previous cycles, a peace deal might have sent silver prices crashing back to earth. In the 2026 cycle, any dip is likely to be met by a wall of industrial buying from companies that are terrified of their production lines going dark. The empire risk factor is also changing the behavior of the world's central banks. Non-aligned nations, specifically the BRICS plus bloc, are watching the U.S. military action in Caracas with extreme caution. From their perspective, if the U.S. government can decide that a sovereign nation's leadership is criminal and use that as a justification to seize its energy and mineral reserves, then no sovereign asset held in the dollar-based system is truly safe. This is accelerating a trend that was already gaining momentum, the repatriation of physical metal. Central banks are no longer content to leave their gold and silver in vaults in London or New York. They are bringing it home, further draining the available float of physical metal in the Western markets. This leads us to a point of structural commodity dislocation. The price you see on your screen, the $75 or $80 spot price, is becoming an increasingly irrelevant number. It is a paper price for a paper market that is running out of physical metal. Institutional investors are beginning to treat silver as a non-sovereign bearer asset, insurance against the very rules of the global financial system being changed overnight by a tweet or a tactical strike. When you combine the 356-to-1 leverage ratio on the COMEX with the 70% decline in physical inventories, you realize that the silver market is essentially a game of musical chairs where 355 people are about to find out there is no chair for them. The comparison to the 2022 Russia-Ukraine crisis is instructive here. In 2022, the shock was largely about energy and grain. Silver moved because it was a safe haven, but it was ultimately tethered to the broader macro environment. In 2026, silver is the shock. It is the metal at the center of the conflict. By seizing Venezuela, the U.S. is attempting to solve a long-term resource deficit by force, effectively nationalizing a portion of the global silver supply to ensure its own industrial and military survival in the face of the Chinese export ban. But in doing so, they have shattered the trust that the global commodity markets are built on. As we look at the charts, we see a gamma squeeze that started in late December, driven by the anticipation of the China ban and the visible U.S. naval buildup. We saw the price hit an all-time high of $84.01 on December 29th, followed by a brief correction on January 1st, as the market tried to process the MOEFCOM mechanics. But the January 3rd strike acted as a shock reversal. It told the market that this wasn't just a regulatory spat, it was a resource war. The price is now breaking out into a new regime, where $80 is not the ceiling, but the new floor. We are moving into a phase of the cycle where the war premium is being priced into every gram of metal. In a world of fracturing trust and kinetic resource acquisition, tangible assets are the only sanctuary. The paper contracts on the COMEX are beginning to be seen for what they are, digital ghosts of a dying era. The real action is happening on the ground, in the vaults being emptied by central banks, and in the streets of Caracas where silver has already reverted to its ancient role as a primary medium of exchange. The math of the 356-to-1 ratio is finally being forced to reconcile with the physical reality of the vault, and the result is a vertical repricing of the world's most undervalued strategic asset. The era of cheap, paper-suppressed silver is over. We have entered the age of the silver supercycle, and the rules of the game have been written in the smoke of the Caracas kinetic. While the global markets adjust their digital spreadsheets and algorithms react to the flashing red and green numbers on the COMEX, the true reality of the silver supercycle is being written in the streets of Caracas. To understand where the price of silver is going, you have to look at what happens when the veneer of the fiat system is stripped away by kinetic force. In Venezuela right now, silver has undergone a categorical transformation. It is no longer a commodity or an investment asset. It has reverted to its ancient, primal role as a primary medium of exchange. It is the only thing that works when the power grid fails, the banking system freezes, and the local currency hits terminal velocity collapse. The Bolivar Soberano is dead. On January 2, 2026, the official rate was roughly 300 VES per dollar. By the morning of the strike on January 3rd, the black market rate, the only rate that determines if you eat or starve, gapped to 560 VES per dollar. This represents an 85% spread in a single day. With the Central Bank of Venezuela effectively decapitated and unable to inject liquidity or set interest rates, pricing discovery for basic survival has shifted to the survival valuation of hard assets. If you walk into a local market in Caracas today, prices aren't being quoted in bolívares. They are being quoted in two things: USDT, tether, and grams of silver. This is the ground truth of the 2026 crisis. Because the banking system is paralyzed by power outages and the sheer uncertainty of the U.S. administrative oversight, digital payments are failing. Direct barter has become the law of the land. We are receiving confirmed reports of silver flakes, shaved directly from jewelry, coins, or industrial scrap being used to buy bread, fuel, and passage. High-purity bullion like American eagles or maple leafs have vanished from the market. They are being hoarded by those who can afford them as lifeboats. What's left is scrap silver cutlery and jewelry being traded at a fear premium that would make a Wall Street trader's head spin. Look at the math of this localized distortion. While the global spot price might be $75 an ounce, the fear premium in a conflict zone like Caracas can push the effective trade value to $100 or more when exchanged for essential goods. This premium reflects silver's utility as an untraceable, indestructible store of wealth that can bribe a guard or buy a seat on a transport out of the country. Paradoxically, we are also seeing the distress discount, where desperate families are forced to liquidate their family heirlooms at 50% of the spot price just to secure immediate calories from opportunistic buyers with cash dollars. This divergence, where silver is simultaneously the most valuable and most undervalued asset, depending on who is holding it, is a preview of the global commodity dislocation that is coming for the rest of the world. The ultimate prize in this kinetic resource war, however, isn't the jewelry in Caracas. It is the Arco Minero del Orinoco. This is a 112,000 square kilometer zone larger than many European nations that is arguably the richest mineral deposit on the planet. Under the Maduro administration, this area was a state-sponsored illicit economy, a black hole where the military and criminal syndicates like the ELN and Tren de Aragua operated with total impunity. They used mercury-intensive, environmentally devastating mining practices to extract gold and silver, which was then laundered through Turkey and the UAE to keep the regime's inner circle afloat. Operation Southern Spear has decapitated that protection network. The Special Forces teams that secured the capital have effectively frozen the logistics of the mining arc. Smugglers and illegal miners have gone to ground, terrified of the U.S. interdiction assets and drones now patrolling the Orinoco. This has created an immediate global supply freeze. The illicit metal that used to find its way into the global gray market is now trapped. This isn't just a Venezuelan problem. It is a massive subtraction from the global aggregate supply that the COMEX and LBMA never accounted for. The U.S. administration is banking on the Plan País, or country plan, developed by the opposition and Maria Corina Machado. The goal is mass privatization, dismantling the criminal fiefdoms, and bringing in Western mining majors like Barrick and Newmont to professionalize extraction. They want to turn the mining arc into a transparent, Western-aligned resource hub that can counter China's dominance. But here's the catch that the soft landing crowd is missing. This transition will take years, not months. The infrastructure in the mining arc has been destroyed by years of neglect and predatory mining. There are massive legal liabilities from previous expropriations, cases like Crystal X, that must be settled before a major public company will put a single drill in the ground. In the short term for the rest of 2026 and well into 2027, Venezuelan silver production is effectively offline. This means the Venezuela shock is not a temporary blip. It is a multi-year supply-side decapitation that coincides perfectly with the China export ban. We are entering the shock phase of Q1 2026, where the combination of the China licenses and the Caracas kinetic will drive silver to retest its all-time highs between $78 and $85 per ounce. As we move into the medium term, even if a friendly government stabilizes Caracas and the war premium begins to fade, silver will not return to its old prices. The industrial floor has been permanently raised. The structural deficit caused by China's solar demand, their green leap forward, and their refusal to export refined metal has put a hard floor under the price at $65 to $75. Any new supply from a professionalized Venezuela is at least 3 to 5 years away, and that's if everything goes perfectly. The long-term outlook for 2030 is even more explosive. The geological reality is that we are running out of high-grade silver. Ore grades are falling globally, and there has been a chronic lack of investment in new primary silver mines for over a decade. It takes 7 to 10 years to bring a new mine from discovery to production. This means the silver deficit is structural and permanent. We are looking at a secular bull market where $100 silver is not a moonshot, but an inevitability as the metal is re-rated as a strategic technology metal. For the people of Venezuela, the path forward is arduous. As the economy eventually dollarizes and stabilizes under a new administration, the local premiums and discounts will eventually vanish, and their silver will once again trade at global spot prices. But for the global investor, the lesson of January 3rd, 2026 is clear. The U.S. military intervention in Venezuela was a watershed moment, a kinetic manifestation of the scramble for resources that defines our century. By attempting to secure the Western Hemisphere's largest energy and mineral reserves, the U.S. has unleashed a Pandora's box of market volatility. The silver market has been hit by a perfect storm. a regulatory supply shock from the east, and a geopolitical demand shock from the south. The result is a paradigm shift. Silver is no longer just a metal, it is a measure of global instability. It is the canary in the coal mine for the death of trust in the financial system. Whether it is the silver flake held in the hand of a trader in Caracas or the futures contract on the NYMEX, the story is the same. In a world of fracturing empires and kinetic resource denial, tangible assets are the only sanctuary left. The Caracas kinetic was the signal. The silver supercycle is the result. If you aren't positioned now, you are waiting for a train that has already left the station at 2 a.m. VET on January 3rd. My name is Kevin Huang, and this is Markets in Context. This analysis is built on ground truth and hard data, not the narratives the mainstream wants you to believe. We are living through the most significant repricing of strategic assets in modern history, and we are going to be here every step of the way to break it down. If you value this level of deep dive research and want to stay ahead of the next resource shock, hit the subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. The era of cheap resources is over. The era of markets. In Context is just beginning. Stay sharp.
This is Dave from Net4 Truth USA, Inglorious Patriots. And I am Charlie Kirk. Ever since the Great Awakening, thousands of content creators like myself have been burning the midnight oil well into the wee hours of the morning, and millions of us who are awake are not getting enough sleep. Everyone knows that a good night's sleep is essential for efficient functioning of the cognitive processes that enable a person to discern truth from fiction and deep state-induced woke dementia. Well, years before I was asked to be an advertiser for MyPillow, I have been using their products. The first product I used was, of course, the pillows. I was impressed with the comfort, and I was able to fall off to sleep almost immediately rather than having to fight a bag of foam and trying to get comfortable. The pillowcases and Giza sheets are absolutely the bee's knees, and I have sets for the 2 beds I have in my home. Another thing is their body pillow. I suffer from a lumbar spine injury that is exacerbated by my preference to sleep on my side. Having the body pillow to roll onto alleviates the pressure and mitigates the discomfort, allowing me to fall asleep quickly. Mike Lindell, a great American patriot, has an entire line of quality products that everyone should try. Once you sleep with the pillows and sheets, you'll throw the ones you have in the garbage or donate them to Goodwill. If you go to www.mypillow.com, there is a link in the description. As a viewer and subscriber to this channel, you can buy anything in the store for 66% off. That's 1/3 of the retail price. Just fill your shopping cart and use promo code N4T at the checkout. Take it from me, folks, I've been using Mike Lindell's products since 2015. There is nothing like them on the market, and I say this with 71 years of sleeping experience. Don't forget, use promo code N4T at checkout.